So Princess Anne has just made a final decision that stunned Britain, and it's one very few people saw coming, because it didn't come from William, it didn't come from Charles, and it wasn't about scandal or misconduct or a paper trail. It came from Anne, and it was about the future. Camilla has been told to step aside, not stripped in disgrace, not caught doing anything wrong, simply told by the one member of the family whose judgment nobody questions that the time has come to make room for the generation that comes next. And that's what makes this so different from anything you've heard before. Because Anne didn't move against Camilla out of rivalry or resentment. She did something harder and, in its own way, more final. She looked at where the monarchy is heading, decided what it needs to survive, and concluded that Camilla stepping back was part of the answer. When the most respected person in the family reaches that conclusion, it doesn't feel like an attack. It feels like a verdict. Before we go any further, two quick things. First, if you're new here, we're Crown Watch, and we break down the royal stories that actually matter, so hit subscribe. And second, if you want the details the mainstream coverage never touches, the story behind the story, head to theroyalfiles.com. There's something on that site we don't talk about here on the channel, a hidden piece of royal history most people never find, and once you do, you'll see this whole family differently. The link is in the description. Okay, let's get into it. So let's start with why it matters so much that this came from Anne, because the messenger is the whole story. Inside the royal family, Anne holds a position no one else does. She is the hardest working member of the family year after year, and she has spent her entire life doing the work without ever asking for anything in return. She doesn't chase status. She doesn't play the games. She has no interest in position for its own sake. And that's exactly what gives her authority. Because when Anne reaches a conclusion, no one can accuse her of self-interest. She has nothing to gain. So when Anne is the one who decides Camilla should step aside, the decision carries a weight that the same words from anyone else simply couldn't have. And this is important, because if this decision had come from William, people would have called it ambition, the heir clearing the board before his time. If it had come from Catherine, people would have called it self-interest, protecting her own future standing. But Anne has no throne coming to her and no position to protect. She reached this conclusion the way she reaches every conclusion, by looking at what the institution actually needs and setting her own feelings aside. And what she concluded is that the monarchy is standing at the edge of a generational shift, and that shift cannot happen cleanly while the arrangements of the present reign are still expanding, still consolidating, still acting as though they'll last forever. Now let's be clear about what step aside actually means, because it's not the same as being removed. Anne didn't order Camilla stripped of anything she currently holds. She didn't have her evicted or disgraced. What Anne concluded is that Camilla needed to stop building for a future that was never hers to build, to stop expanding her position, and to begin ceding precedence to the generation that will actually carry the monarchy forward. It's the difference between taking something away and asking someone to make room. And in many ways, being asked to make room by someone you respect, for reasons you can't argue with, is harder than being pushed out. Because you can fight an enemy. You cannot fight a fair conclusion delivered by someone who wants nothing for themselves. So here's how it started. A review had been underway, the routine, unglamorous work of planning how the royal households will function as the reign eventually changes. And in the course of it, something surfaced from Camilla's office. Requests, each one on its own, looked ordinary. One sought to keep certain arrangements in place regardless of what came next. Another sought lasting influence over appointments and offices. A third sought to extend protections to people close to Camilla well into the future. Individually, unremarkable, together, they described a position not winding down toward a transition, but expanding, entrenching, preparing to carry its full weight straight into the next reign. Before we go further, real quick, if you're into deep dives on royal stories that actually sit with the complexity instead of just picking a side, hit subscribe and join us here at Crown Watch. We are building something good. Okay, back to it. Now I want to be fair to Camilla, because this story doesn't work if you make her a villain, and this particular story genuinely isn't about her doing anything wrong. From her side, none of this was scheming. It was continuity. She had served for years, endured public hostility that would have broken most people, and done the work often without the affection others received for free. And she believed, with real justification, that her position should carry forward, that everything she'd built and everyone loyal to her deserved to be protected into whatever came next. That's not greed. When you've spent decades earning your place, you don't expect to be asked to start stepping back the moment you finally secured it. From inside Camilla's world, continuing to build was simply carrying on. She wasn't fighting the future. She just assumed she was part of it. But Anne was looking at the same picture from a completely different angle, and this is where the first twist comes in. Because Anne wasn't asking whether Camilla had done anything wrong. She was asking a much bigger question, one that had nothing to do with blame. She was asking what the monarchy needs to survive the next transition. And when Anne looked at it that way, the problem wasn't Camilla's conduct. It was the collision that was coming. Because you cannot have a smooth generational handover while the outgoing generation is still expanding its footprint. The two things cannot happen at once. Every arrangement Camilla secured for the future was, whether she intended it or not, a piece of the next reign being spoken for before the next reign had begun. And Anne understood something the others were too close to see. The problem wasn't that Camilla was doing something improper. The problem was that she was doing something permanent, at exactly the moment the institution needed things to stay open. That reframing is what made Anne's decision so different from everything else that's happened in this family lately. This wasn't a case built out of misconduct. There was no smoking gun, no signed order, no scandal. There was simply a clear-eyed assessment that the present reign's arrangements and the next reign's clarity could not both survive, and that one of them had to give. And Anne, being Anne, refused to pretend otherwise just because the honest answer was uncomfortable. And here's the moment where it almost went a different way. The near miss that makes Anne's conclusion feel earned rather than harsh. Because before Anne reached her decision, there was a genuine argument on the other side, and Anne, being fair, actually waited. The argument was that continuity has value too, that a clean break isn't always the wisest path, that keeping experienced hands in place through a transition can steady an institution rather than destabilize it. And it's not a bad argument. There's a real case that the monarchy benefits from continuity, that sweeping away the previous generation's arrangements too quickly can leave the new reign exposed and inexperienced. Anne took that seriously, because she doesn't reach conclusions carelessly, and she has no interest in change for its own sake. But when she looked closely, she saw the difference between continuity and entrenchment, and it's a crucial one. Continuity is keeping wisdom and experience available to the next generation. Entrenchment is one generation refusing to let the next one actually lead. And what Camilla's request described wasn't continuity offered in service of the future. It was entrenchment, a position expanding to secure itself against the future. The tell was in the direction. Genuine continuity gets smaller over time, handing things off, stepping back, making room. What Anne was looking at was getting larger, holding on tighter, spreading further, and a position that grows as the transition approaches isn't preparing to support the next reign. It's preparing to resist it. That distinction is what settled it for Anne, and it's why she couldn't, in the end, side with the argument for simply letting things carry on. So Anne took her conclusion, and she did the thing that gave it its force. She said it directly to Charles before she said it to anyone else. And what she told her brother is the heart of the whole thing. She reminded him that the hardest part of any reign is not holding power. It's letting it pass cleanly to the next hands. That a monarchy survives not because each generation clings to everything it has, but because each generation knows when to make room. And she told him plainly that if the present reign's arrangements kept expanding, kept entrenching, kept preparing to carry forward at full strength, then the next reign would begin tangled in the last one, and that tangle could do more damage than any single dispute. When Charles said Camilla was not simply another member of the family, Anne agreed and turned it around the way she always does. That, she said, was exactly why it mattered more, not less. Because the more senior the position, the harder it is to unwind later, and the more damage it does if it isn't unwound in time. A junior arrangement carried into the next reign is a nuisance. The consort's full position, carried forward unclear and unresolved, is a crisis waiting to happen. Anne wasn't asking Charles to punish his wife. She was asking him to protect the future by helping the present let go at the right moment. And here's why it had to be Anne who said it. Because Charles could dismiss almost anyone else. He could hear ambition in William's voice, self-interest in Catherine's, resentment in advisors, but he could not hear any of those things in Anne, because they weren't there. Anne genuinely wanted nothing. She wasn't clearing a rival or protecting a stake. She was doing the one thing she has always done, telling her brother the truth that no one else was willing to say, because she was the only one whose truth he couldn't wave away. Then came the second twist. The one that showed this wasn't just Anne's opinion, but something the institution had already been quietly preparing for. Because when the arrangements from Camilla's office were laid against the framework being built for the next reign, a warning surfaced, one that had been sent more than once, in writing. It stated plainly that no position from the present reign could be assumed to carry forward at full strength, that the transition required the outgoing arrangements to wind down rather than expand. Those warnings had been received, a receipt confirmed one had been opened, and then days later a fresh request appeared, doing the exact opposite of what the warning advised. Not winding down. Expanding, the requests hadn't slowed when the transition was explained. They had accelerated. That pattern is what turned Anne's judgment from a matter of opinion into a matter of necessity, because it meant the collision Anne feared wasn't hypothetical. It was already happening. The present reign's arrangements weren't just failing to prepare for the transition, they were actively growing against it, each new request making the eventual handover harder and messier. And Anne, who had spent her life watching the institution and understanding its rhythms better than almost anyone, recognized that if someone didn't step in now, the next reign would inherit a knot that could take years to untangle in full public view at the worst possible moment. Now here comes the third twist, the one that connected everything to Charles himself. Because the framework that made the transition necessary, the rule that said the present reign's arrangements had to give way rather than carry forward, traced back to a reform. Months earlier, a reform had been approved, one designed to tie royal positions and support to active duty and to ensure that nothing carried automatically from one reign into the next, to answer years of criticism about cost and unclear privilege. And Charles had signed it himself. So the standard Anne was invoking wasn't hers. It was Charles's own, the one he'd created, believing, as everyone does, that it would only ever apply to other people. Anne wasn't imposing something new on the family. She was holding up the mirror Charles had built and asking him to look into it honestly, even though the reflection now included his wife. Charles stared at that signature like it belonged to a stranger, because when he'd signed the reform, he'd meant it as a gift to the future, a way of ensuring the monarchy stayed lean and clear as it passed from hand to hand. He had never imagined it would one day mean asking Camilla to step aside, but that was exactly what it meant, because the reform said, in effect, that the future belongs to those who serve it, not to those who held it before, and that nothing carries forward simply because someone wishes it would. And Camilla's entire position was built on the wish that it would. Charles asked the question he'd been avoiding. Was Anne asking him to push Camilla out? And Anne's answer was pure Anne. No, she was asking him to help Camilla let go at the right time, which is a very different thing. Being pushed out is a humiliation. Stepping aside at the proper moment with dignity intact for the good of the institution you've served is an act of grace. Anne wasn't trying to strip Camilla of anything. She was offering her the chance to do the hardest and most honorable thing a person in her position can do, to make room willingly before the transition forced it messily. The difference mattered enormously, because one version ended Camilla's story in defeat, and the other ended it in something closer to dignity. Camilla, when she understood that Anne was the one behind this, turned on her directly, and it's one of the sharpest exchanges in the whole affair. She accused Anne of siding with the next generation, of deciding that Camilla's time was over, of pushing her toward an exit she wasn't ready to take, and Anne refused the accusation flatly. She said affection wasn't the issue, that she held nothing against Camilla personally, that this wasn't about Camilla at all. It was about the institution and the transition it faced. A position, she said, is not a possession, and a place in the future is not something you can claim simply by refusing to let go of the present. And the fact that Anne said it without anger, without triumph, without wanting anything from it, made it far harder to fight than open hostility would have been. Then Camilla tried the argument that had always worked before. She invoked her history, the 30 years, the sacrifices, everything she'd endured. She asked whether all of it counted for nothing. And Anne, characteristically, did not deny the history. She acknowledged it fully, said Camilla's service was real, that the hostility she'd endured was real, that none of it was being erased. But then she said the thing that ended the argument. Service earns respect, she said. It does not earn permanence. And the greatest service Camilla could offer the institution now might be the one thing she least wanted to do, which was to step aside gracefully and let the future belong to those who would carry it. There was no answer to that, because it was true, and it had been said by the one person who couldn't be accused of saying it for her own gain. And here's what's worth noticing about how William and Catherine handled the whole thing, because it tells you how carefully this was managed. Neither of them pushed, neither of them spoke against Camilla. In fact, once Anne took it on, they stepped back almost entirely, and that was deliberate, because they understood something Camilla didn't. The most powerful thing they could do was stay silent and let Anne be the voice. William, who has every reason to want the transition to go cleanly, said almost nothing, because he knew that the moment he spoke, the whole thing would look like a young king clearing the path early. Catherine, who has the clearest interest in the shape of the next reign, stayed quiet for the same reason. They let the one person with no stake in the outcome carry it, and by doing so, they made the outcome impossible to dismiss. It was a striking piece of restraint, and it only works when the person you're standing behind is genuinely beyond reproach. Anne's credibility wasn't just useful, it was the entire strategy. And there's a deeper truth underneath all of this about what generational transitions actually cost. Because every reign at some point has to face the same uncomfortable moment. The people who held power, who served faithfully, who gave decades of their lives, have to make room for those who come next. And it is almost never easy, because the people being asked to step back are rarely ready to. They've earned their place. They've fought for it. And being told that the very institution they served now needs them to recede feels understandably like a betrayal, even when it isn't one. Anne understood this better than anyone, because she has watched it happen, and she knows that the families and the institutions that survive are the ones that manage it with grace, and the ones that struggle are the ones that cling. She wasn't asking Camilla to do anything Anne wouldn't one day have to do herself. She was asking her to do it well. That's what made Anne's decision so much more than a move against one person. It was a statement about how the whole institution intends to handle the thing every institution fears most, the passing of power from one generation to the next. Anne was saying, in effect, that this monarchy would not cling, would not let the arrangements of one reign strangle the beginning of the next, would not pretend the transition wasn't coming, and she was willing to be the one to prove it, starting with the hardest case of all, the wife of the sitting king. If the standard could be applied there, it could be applied anywhere. And that, more than the specifics of Camilla's position, is what made Britain sit up and pay attention. Now here comes the final twist, the one that suggests this was never only about Camilla. Because among the requests from Camilla's office, buried near the bottom, was a short handwritten list, a few arrangements she wanted secured, and at the top, a single name, the person she wanted protected first, before anyone else, before even herself. And that reframes the whole story. Because a woman fighting only for her own place doesn't write down someone else's name to protect first. That list suggests Camilla's refusal to step aside was never really about Camilla. It was about someone whose future depended entirely on Camilla holding her position. Someone whose place in the next reign vanished the moment Camilla let go, and that's why stepping aside was so impossible for her. It wasn't her own future she was clinging to, it was theirs. And if that name ever becomes public, this stops being a story about a woman making room and becomes a story about exactly who she was really trying to protect, and why she couldn't bring herself to step back even when the most respected person in the family asked her to. Nobody celebrated. That's the detail that stays with me, and it's especially true of Anne, because Anne took no satisfaction in any of it. She hadn't wanted to be the one to say it. She'd been the one who had to, because she was the only person whose word couldn't be dismissed. She reached her conclusion. She stated it plainly. She offered Camilla the dignified version rather than the brutal one, and then she did the thing that is most characteristic of her. She didn't linger. She'd said what was true, and she left it there. Before she went, she told Charles something that lands harder the longer you sit with it. A transition delayed is not a transition avoided. It is only a transition made worse. The longer the present reign refused to make room, the harder the eventual handover would be, and the more it would cost everyone, including Camilla. And Anne's decision changed more than one position. Across the palace, the way people thought about the coming transition quietly shifted. Because if Anne, of all people, had concluded that even the consort's position had to give way to the future, then no arrangement was beyond the reach of the transition. Staff who had assumed their roles would simply carry forward began to understand that nothing was guaranteed to survive the handover, that the next reign would be built deliberately rather than inherited by default. And the message underneath it all was unmistakable. The monarchy was preparing to turn a page, and Anne had just made clear that the page would actually turn, that the present reign would not be allowed to write itself indefinitely into the future. There was a subtler shift, too, in how the family understood the transition itself, because for a long time the question of what happens when the reign changes had been treated as something distant, something that could be sorted out later. Anne's decision ended that comfortable vagueness. She forced the family to confront the fact that the transition was already underway, that the choices being made now would shape it, and that pretending otherwise only guaranteed a harder reckoning later. In a single decision, she turned an abstract future into a present responsibility, and that, more than any removal, is what shook the family. So here's where I hand it to you, because I genuinely want to know where you land. Was Anne right to make the call, to look past blame and simply decide what the institution needs to survive its next transition? Or did she, however fairly, help push out a woman who had given decades to the family, dressing a removal up as an act of grace? Was Camilla wrong to refuse, clinging to a position the transition could no longer support? Or was she doing the only thing a person can do when someone they're protecting depends on them holding on? And does Anne's willingness to make the hard call, without wanting anything for herself, prove she's the conscience of this family, or just prove that the family knew they needed someone untouchable to deliver a verdict no one else could deliver cleanly? There is no clean answer, and anyone who hands you one quickly hasn't sat with the full weight of it. And the thing I can't stop thinking about is that it had to be Anne. That's the tell. Because if asking Camilla to step aside had been simple, anyone could have done it. The fact that the family needed the one person above the games, the one voice too respected to argue with, tells you how hard this was and how much was riding on getting it right. Anne didn't take anything from Camilla. She simply told her the truth that everyone else was afraid to say, that the future was coming whether anyone was ready or not, and that making room for it was the last great service she could offer. That's not a rival clearing the board. That's the conscience of a family doing the thing a conscience is for. And that handwritten list, the name Camilla wanted protected first, is still out there. If it ever becomes public, this stops being a story about stepping aside and becomes something much bigger. And when it does, you already know where to look for the parts nobody else will tell you. The next chapter of this family is still being written, and when it moves, we will be here to talk about it. If this video made you see any part of this story differently, drop your position in the comments. I read every one of them. And on a question this complicated, I genuinely want to know where you land. Subscribe if you are not already with us, because the next chapter is coming, and it is going to be one worth watching.